Well, I got into it quite by accident, and it was a very happy accident. I just finished my undergrad degree. I moved out to the west coast of Canada, and I had trained in mainly mental health work, community mental health. And at that time in Canada, it was mainly psychiatric deinstitutionalization going on. And I saw a little ad that said, looking for people to support people who've recently come out of provincial institutions. I assumed it was psychiatric institutions. Applied for the job, got the job, showed up my first day of work and said, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought I was going to be doing. But it happened that that was this organization set up by a small group of parents called Woodlands Parents Groups, whose kids all had very complex disabilities, challenging behavior, medical issues, all that stuff. And we're all in a large provincial institution. And they wanted their kids out. And they realized that none of the existing services and supports in the community would take their kids. They were always told they didn't fit. So they said, all right, if our kids don't fit, what we need is a system that builds the supports around our kids and not fits our kids into something that already exists. So they came up with that simple, we call it a citizenship model, just of individualized funding, called it personal network or support network, and brokerage was the term we used. And it worked. You know, at that point, nobody was taking kids with this level of disability out of institutions, but it worked because of the flexibility, the ability to be really intimate. And so really, I haven't done a whole lot other than to convey the message that these moms developed in various ways. And I've been fortunate to, went on to study it and look more at the theory, and my other degrees pursued that. So worked initially as a broker, and then I was more on I worked for a large provincial advocacy group around deinstitutionalization, individualized funding. And then since I pursued it more as my academic career, both the UK and Canada and different places. So I've been very fortunate, really. So I just took that message that I was taught by this group of moms, and I've tried to do what I can to make that happen, and to do the academic side, the study and the research of it. So I like to think of all the areas I work in as relating to the notion of citizenship. And I tried to come at that in a variety of ways. So I've done a lot of research, obviously, on the technical things, so the policy framework, so the individualized funding, the brokerage, all that stuff. But I also got very interested in, asking the question, well, how is it that we evolved a society where people with disabilities didn't have citizenship? So I spent a lot of time on looking at rights theory and trying to understand our traditional sort of Western theories of rights and citizenship, and figuring out why groups had been excluded and how we'd have to change the theory to accommodate a broader people. So I did a lot of work on that, and then I also do a lot of work on the history of intellectual disability. Again, trying to trace, how do we get to the point of exclusion, and maybe that'll help us understand how we reverse that. So quite a kind of diverse, but for me, it's all sort of centers on this notion of citizenship. And then we do a lot more, I guess you'd call it more focused micro research. So we have a project around employment. How do you encourage employment of people with disabilities? We have projects on how do you help people with disabilities get the skill set to fully embrace their citizenship. So really quite a broad range. We've got projects on sexual health, so fairly broadly writ kind of citizenship. But most of my work has this kind of core that really asks the questions, well, why have people been excluded? What do we need to do to get them included? Well, really, the individualized funding is just a tool, but it's if you look at the traditional structure of human services, the resources have always been put in the hands of the professionals and the services. And we all know in Western society, sort of money is power, right? If you are paying the bills, you call the shots. So in some ways, individualized funding is as simple as that. By giving the people the power of controlling the resources, that also gives them the power to control the nature and the quality of their services. So in the same way, if you or I are going out to buy a car or something, right? We're not going to buy a car that we don't like or people don't, just because someone's trying to sell it to us or because that's what's available. You know, we will use our power as a consumer to get the car we want, to get it in the way we want, and to use it in the way we want. So it gives you that sort of authority, if you like, to make decisions to control. But it also, for people with developmental disabilities particularly, if your choice is you can have this service, and usually sometimes you'll have a choice of this or that, but usually it's this service, it makes people really, really vulnerable, right? Because they need that service to exist day to day. If you don't have the power to walk away from that service, you're going to tolerate a lot of stuff. And you hear this from families, say, well, you know, I don't really like it, I'm not really happy with it, but I can't take them home, I don't have the ability to support them. So it also, I think, really reduces people's vulnerability because it gives them the power to walk away from a provider that they're not happy with and have the ability to replace them because they have the resources. So I think in British Columbia where it's really worked the best is where it's empowered small groups of families who get together, or the small microboard that really allow people to step outside of the system and to really not build a set of services, but build a life that the supports are part of that life, but they don't dictate that life, they don't dictate the quality. So I think that's where it's been most exciting and most effective for people. I think some of the pitfalls we've experienced is we did not provide enough support and information for families to understand it, to take the step, and the tools to actually allow them to use it. So our uptake has been lower than we thought. We also put in restrictions so that people can't actually use their individualized funding to buy from an existing service provider. And that, I think, has been a big mistake because it restricted people's ability to mix and match or to stay with somebody they were comfortable with. So I'd say they're our two biggest errors. I mean, I think the National Disability Insurance Scheme is really exciting. That it's you know, it's a very bold step. So I think the potential is enormous, right? And I do, though, worry because it's so big and relatively rapid, that if they don't put the structures in place to allow people to really make the use of it, then there's a risk of people becoming isolated, people not being able to, you can inadvertently increase the vulnerability, right? So if they don't set up the right set of supports, they don't get the right advice, or I think, and my understanding of the system here is very limited, just a week or so of background, but I think they need to pay a bit more attention to the supported decision making, the facilitation, brokerage, local area coordination type support. Not everybody is going to need that, but some people will to make it work. So there's a risk of seeing what we saw in the UK, where the bulk of direct payment users are people with physical disabilities who are quite capable of saying what they need and how they want it and who they want it. That's not the case for a lot of the folks with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. So if they don't pay enough attention to that piece, I think there's a risk that some folks are going to be left out and potentially more vulnerable. Right? Yeah, I think the people who don't have a strong personal network or family are, as they are now, the most vulnerable. And that's not going to change with this system. I think the message for me is, shouldn't that be job one anyway? Like, if you have no one in your life that cares about you, then really isn't that the most important thing we can do, is to try to change that? So I think there needs to be capacity in the system to support that network building, to be creative, and recognize, if you're the local area coordinator, that sort of stuff, that's really your most important job and where you start, is to really intentionally focus on building that. And we've learned, we don't do it very well yet, but we've learned some tricks. So say what we used to do in the early days in BC, where someone was isolated in an institution, we would match them with another family, and they became like a kind of surrogate family almost for that person, to help kickstart that network and to build it. The microboard system, the coordinators of microboards will come in and try to build a network around a person. The Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network is an organization that's all they do. So there's a coordinator, and they don't do sport coordination, any of that stuff. They build and coordinate and sustain that network. And that's hard work. It costs money, it needs an investment, but to say at the end of the day, if we haven't achieved that, nothing else is all that important. Because all of us, I mean, you ask people what's important in your life, at the end of the day, we come back to our family, our friends, the people we love and love us. And it's kind of warm and fuzzy, but if we can't give people that, or at least the potential for that, then really doesn't matter who supports you and how you're supported. Sort of.